explanation of deep origination. Since we have a lot of topics in this sutta, I don't want to give a detailed account of dependent origination here. I've already done it in relation to several other suttas. So this is just a general overview, a quick overview of dependent origination. Okay, so then that is the side of origination, but then there's the side of cessation. And so to end old age, sickness, and death, one has to stop the process of birth. To stop the process of birth, one has to, basically, to put it very concisely, one has to put an end to clinging, craving, and ignorance. Those are the driving forces that underlie the round of rebirths. I'm not sure whether I should ask for questions about dependent origination here, because as I said, I'm just treating it very concisely. Look.
I do just the word need. What is the relationship between the word nidana? Nidana. Is it the same word?
Nidana is sometimes used for each of the factors of dependent origination. So, say, birth is a nidana, existence is a nidana, clinging is a nidana, craving is a nidana. Each of those is a nidana. You can say a cause. But sometimes nidana is used in a general sense for the whole process of dependent origination. Okay, now I want to go on to the next section, which is that called the possible and impossible. Okay, and now the Buddha is going to develop this topic by explaining certain things that are possible, certain things that are impossible in contrasting pairs. Okay, so he begins with certain things that's impossible for a person who possesses right view. And this is referring to a person who has the world-transcending right view. This is not just a right understanding of the Dharma, but who has actually seen the truth of the Dharma through direct experience. A person who has made the breakthrough to realization. It's not necessarily the person, the arahant, the one who has reached the end of the path, but this is the person who has entered upon the irreversible path. A person who has entered into the stream and can never go back to the level of a worldly person. So such a person could never treat, or better to render, regard any formation, any conditioned thing as permanent. That is impossible. But it's possible for an ordinary person to regard things as permanent. Again, it's impossible for a person who has right view to regard any conditioned phenomena as sukha here, as pleasurable. This has to be understood in a special sense. Like a person with right view, even an arahant, could regard ice cream, for example, as pleasurable. And he'll regard like these Ayurvedic medical preparations, we call them decoctions, as unpleasant. They're bitter. Or even bitter gourd, a popular dish in South Asia, he'll regard it as bitter. It doesn't mean that the person loses their experience of pleasure and pain as sensations, but what's meant that he doesn't regard any conditioned phenomena as being a basis for some kind of secure, everlasting happiness. So he doesn't rely on conditioned phenomena. And then the third type of impossibility here is that such a person with right view will not regard any phenomena as being his self or herself, as being the truly existent self. So they look upon the five aggregates as being just this collection of aggregates, but they understand these five aggregates: body, feeling, perception, mental activities, consciousness, as being not mine, not I, not myself. Even a person at the lower stages of enlightenment will still have some intrinsic clinging to the five aggregates. So sometimes they'll act as if they're taking the aggregates to be mine and I. They could have some pride. Sometimes can be a little conceited and look down at others. They might have a little craving left for possessions. But when they step back and reflect, then they realize that all of these things are really unrelated to a self, not related to a self. And so they can easily become detached from them. Okay, then we come to the next set of 6 things which are said to be impossible for a person with right view, who has this world-transcending, or this liberating right view. It's impossible that such a person could deprive his mother of life and his father of life. Possible for an ordinary person, one who doesn't have this level of enlightenment, to take the life of his mother or father. And, it seems that this is quite a remarkable statement, because even all of us, we would never think of harming our mother or father, but until one reaches that first stage of enlightenment, there is always that possibility, that potential in the mind. And sometimes you read in the newspaper somebody who has been brought up apparently in a harmonious and happy family, but he just gets sort of misdirected at some point, and he kills his parents. Or maybe there's some built-up bitterness from childhood which just explodes. But this is impossible for a person with right view. And it's impossible, continuing, for a person with this right view to take the life of an arahant. It's impossible for a person of this right view to maliciously injure the Buddha, causing him to shed blood. I think this was said because Devadatta, who was the Buddha's cousin and very envious of the Buddha, and he wanted to kill the Buddha and to take over the leadership of the Sangha. And so one day, when the Buddha was outside doing walking meditation outside a cave, Devadatta went up to the top of the hill and he pushed a boulder so that it came rolling down the hill towards the Buddha. His intention was to kill the Buddha, so that the boulder would hit the Buddha, knock the Buddha off the hill, and kill him. But the boulder sort of got deflected off another rock and went in a different direction. But when it hit the other rock, then a splint of stone got knocked off the boulder and hit the Buddha in the leg and caused him to bleed. And so Devadatta committed that terrible deed. Okay, so that's the fourth one. The fifth one is that it's impossible for a person of right view to maliciously cause a schism in the Sangha. That is, when the Sangha or community is in harmony, if somebody plots and schemes with bad intentions to create a division in the order, the monastic order, that becomes a terrible, heavy karma. Sixth one in the set is that it's impossible for a person with this right view to acknowledge somebody else apart from the Buddha as his spiritual teacher or master. I mean, this doesn't mean that somebody with right view, of course, maybe he'll be a disciple of this Achan, this Soyador, this Bhante, but that doesn't contradict this statement. What is meant is that somebody who has this direct experiential right view of the Dhamma won't look to anybody else as the supreme spiritual teacher, anybody else but the Buddha, because he knows that the Buddha is the one who has seen the ultimate truth. And so he will regard the Buddha as his supreme guide on the path to enlightenment. Okay, maybe at this point I'll ask whether there's any questions before we get into some of the more controversial areas. So you go on then. Okay. So now, next one, he says, it's impossible, it cannot happen that two, let's just leave the terminology here, we'll say two fully enlightened Buddhas can arise at the same time in one world system, or in one world. And what this means is that when a Buddha arises, then appears in the world, then he gives his teaching to the world, and then the teaching will last a certain number of years. In the case of Gautama Buddha, they say his teaching is supposed to last 5,000 years. So that is the lifespan of the Dharma. Now within this period, it said, it's impossible for another Buddha to arise that is a fully enlightened Buddha, one who has fully mastered the Dharma and could teach it in its completeness. It doesn't mean that it's impossible for other beings or people to achieve enlightenment during the time of the Buddha's teaching. I mean, the purpose of the Buddha's teaching is to enlighten people, but they become enlightened through the teaching, the guidance, the teaching, the guidance, the instructions of the Buddha, of Gautama Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha. But if at the time the Buddha is alive, the Buddha's teaching is still alive, still passed down, another Buddha to arise, then it would be a confusing situation for people. This Buddha is teaching here, that Buddha is teaching there. And so it's said that one Buddha's teaching prevails at a particular period, and only when that Buddha's teaching decays, vanishes, disappears, can another Buddha appear. Because the special function of a Buddha is to discover the Dharma of enlightenment at a time when it's lost, when it's not known in the world. Okay, then the next is, it said that it's impossible that for two wheel-turning monarchs to arise in the world at the same time. This is the wheel-turning monarch is the ideal ruler of Buddhist tradition. He's the one who unifies the world under the reign of goodness, virtue. And from a historical point of view, one would say that it's a legendary figure, since we don't have any examples in historical memory of a wheel-turning monarch. Okay, let us continue. First, I'll take this whole paragraph, then we'll open it up for discussion. And first I'll explain my point of view on this paragraph. Okay, he understands, and please lock the doors, don't let anybody get out until I give my explanation. He understands it is impossible, it cannot happen, that a woman could be, we'll use simpler terminology, could be a perfectly enlightened Buddha. There is no such possibility, but it is possible that a man could be a perfectly enlightened Buddha. That's a possibility. Again, he understands it's impossible that a woman could become a wheel-turning monarch, that a woman could occupy the position of Sakka. Sakka is the king of the heavenly god, of the gods of the sense sphere heaven. Impossible that a woman could occupy the position of Mara. Mara is in Buddhist tradition, he is called the evil one, the tempter, the one who tries to prevent others from attaining enlightenment. It's impossible that a woman could occupy the position of Brahma. Brahma here probably is referring to Mahabrahma, who is the king of the deities in one of the higher celestial realms. Okay, but it's possible that a man could occupy the position of Sakka, Mara, and Brahma. Okay, so this is the passage, and now let me explain my understanding. First, qualifications in understanding. If you look at this, one could take it, this is an example of ancient Indian misogyny, or putting women into lower positions. But first of all, one has to say that the Buddha held that women could achieve the state of enlightenment as liberated ones. So in that sense, the Buddha is not saying that women don't have the capacity for enlightenment. He said that women could achieve all four of the stages of enlightenment up to the stage of the fully liberated one, the one who's fully awakened, fully enlightened, in Arahant. So in that sense, the Buddha's teaching is quite, call it revolutionary, or at least it's free from complete discrimination in that respect. And now, if we notice here, if we look at these positions, we see that there's the perfectly enlightened Buddha, the Sammasambuddha, the monarch, the universal monarch, the king of the lower gods, Mara, the chief of all of the evil ones, the chief of the forces of evil. Then there's Brahma, the chief of the higher gods. Okay, Brahma, what is it that unifies all of these people or these beings or positions? The unifying factor.
It's as if they were all human positions, like a king.
That's true also. That isn't quite what I had in mind. Something else.
Consciousness?
Of course, they all have consciousness. Maybe I'm not stating the question clearly. What is it that unifies them and distinguishes them from others who might be in their same group? Exactly, that's exactly the word. Those are the authorities. And now we have to remember that the Buddha is teaching in ancient India. in ancient India, not only ancient India, but probably in India right up to the present, I have to say this with a little regret, but it's always the man who's in the position of authority. You know, it struck me, I don't know the Indian history in its totality, but I don't know of any eminent queens that have appeared in the history of India. We look at British history. You know, in Britain also, in traditional British society, the man would be a position of authority, but we have in, well, they call it the Elizabethan era, because who was the chief then? Queen Elizabeth was Queen Elizabeth I. She was the world, if anybody came close to being the world ruler, the world wheel-turning monarch, it was Queen Elizabeth, who had, you know, the territories, the Americas, all over the world. Well, maybe not quite at that time. But then later we have, in the 19th century, we name that era after her, the Victorian period, Queen Victoria. She also was like the world ruler at that time. And then even in China, always the man is the position of authority, but there have been some famous Chinese empresses. But Indian history, to my knowledge, I don't think there have been any eminent Indian queens who have ruled over the states of India. And so it's the authority that is being stressed here. And so this doesn't mean that a person who's a woman now, let us say, from the perspective of the text, it doesn't mean that a person who's a woman now can't become a Buddha in the future. But from the perspective of the text, as she's developing towards becoming, if she forms an aspiration to become a perfectly enlightened Buddha in the future, one who is going to discover and expound to the world the path to enlightenment, along the way, she'll have to take rebirth as a male. But this is some thought that I have, again, my personal opinion, that something that, what is your name? Yeah. Amelia indicated when she said that they all are human, that the Buddha's texts are always depicting these situations, even in cosmic aeons, in the past and the future, modeling them after the situation of India in the time of the Buddha. And so it's said that whenever a Buddha arises, he's always coming from either the Kshatriya class or the Brahmin class. Like in other world systems, there are going to be the 4 classes of Indian society. And it strikes me a little bit strange. I've read something by a biologist, some biologists who say that if somehow cosmic time were to be reversed and we were to go back to like the initial life forms that appeared on this earth, even if conditions were to be just slightly different, the evolution of life would have taken completely different forms than it has now. So I just wonder how it's possible in other world systems for there to be beings depicted as human beings with necessarily of 2 sexes, male and female. Maybe there's possibilities in other world systems for there to be 3 sexes, so that for reproduction to take place, 3 of them have to get together rather than 2. I think the reason why 2 sexes appeared was to vary the genetic combinations so that there could be greater diversity of life. But if 2 sexes have given rise to so much diversity, you can imagine what will happen if 3 are necessary, 4 are necessary. And maybe it's possible in other life forms for beings to be reborn as hermaphrodites capable of reproduction. You know, in the human world, there are people who are born as hermaphrodites, but I guess they're not capable of reproduction. But possibly in other world systems, there could be hermaphrodites that can reproduce with enough genetic variety to give great diversity. So when statements like this are made, you know, I just don't know how to interpret, or the way I interpret them is that everything is sort of expounded through the perspective of the situation in India in the Buddha's time, in which the male is the authority. We see the male as the authority not only in the sphere of enlightenment with the Buddha, but also, you know, so you can say, well, maybe we can't become a fully enlightened Buddha, but we don't become Mara. But in fact, you can become Mara also. That, you know, if your karmic actions lead you in that direction, then you can become Mara. It's just that from the perspective of the text, before you get to be Mara, you become a male. Does this make sense? No.
What if the next Buddha that will be born
Yeah.
is not from India, but from a country like, say, America, where women may eventually become presidents? Then you may have a different perspective at that point, as compared to which says women cannot become Buddhas.
Yeah, yeah. Again, I don't have some super normal ability to understand all of these passages, to make pronouncements. But all I can say again is that, you know, this is given from the perspective, the background of India in the Buddha's time. In fact, in the commentaries, I believe it's always said that Buddhas always arise in Jambudvipa. Jambudvipa is the Indian subcontinent. But, you know, in other world systems, you know, this world is going to collapse at some time. Other world systems are going to arise. You know, assuming that they're going to develop to the point that they could sustain intelligent life, they're not going to have in India. So I saw a hand there.
Yeah.
And I think, oh, you have? Oh,
yes.
Okay, Ravi then.
Yes, Bhante. I think a lot of emphasis given to the gender, ideally in the Chinese tradition and also some of the tradition in nature.
I think you're not getting you're not speaking into the mic part itself.
In nature, as people grow old, they become gentler and normally kinder. Maybe the ladies also generally, maybe a little kinder sometimes. But how I see it is that very often when it comes to a higher level of mental and spiritual development, the gender is not important at all.
I agree with that too.
Yeah. For instance, now if you look at the Kuan Yin in the Mahayana tradition, you can't say whether it's a man or a lady, you know.
Actually,
so it's not important. It's not the body that's important. It is the teaching, and it's people pay. And also in Buddhism, it's the order of nuns was the first one where the women were recognized was in Buddhism.
Yeah, that is so.
In the whole world, I mean, that is the first time. That's what they say, because established order was never in any other religion. There was no established order for ladies, you know. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Annie had a.
Here, right, I have a very interesting question. Thank you. At the Lotus Flower Sutra.
Lotus Flower Sutra,
Yeah, the chapter 12. And one of the bhikkhu also asked the same question because it is 5 possible and impossible. And then at the time, Manjushri Bodhisattva, he was come up to talk, and then one of the bhikkhu was asked him, usually what are you preaching? Manjushri Bodhisattva said that I preach in Lotus Flower Sutra. And he said, oh, this powerful sutra, what the Buddha taught, does anyone achieve enlightenment and attain the Buddhahood by this sutra? He said, yes. One of the girl, she was a dragon's daughter, and she studied this sutra, and then he attained Buddhahood. And right now, the Sariputra is a powerful bhikkhu with the other bhikkhu. They say, that's impossible in this under this five condition, right? The woman never attained Buddhahood. So now Manjushri was invited this dragon girl to show up. She was show up, and then she offered a pearl to the Buddha, and then it's so quick and fast, just like a second. And she asked Sariputra, does the Buddha establish a pearl soon enough? She said, yes, it's so quick. She said, you can see this. Just in a second, she turned to a Buddha, and then go to preaching the Dhamma. And then now the Buddha proved that it's true. And then, but a lot of bhikkhu in that time, they still think of these five conditions is real, right things. The Buddha, only the man, not the girl, not the women. So I was very happy for this. Because then bring every woman, every one of us think, oh, we still can cultivate, we still can attain the Buddhahood one day, right? Yes.
Yeah. So I think this is, it seems at this point was somewhat controversial in certain periods.
In this chapter, the Sariputra still say these five different conditions, say that, oh, the women never, and the Manjushri proved that, and the Buddha agree with that. Thank you.
Any other comment, question? Anybody want to give their point of view on this issue? Okay, so I think, please don't recognize X has to be understood against its historical period. Okay, the rest of the sutta deals with the working of karma, and just, I mean, it can be gone through rather quickly. The time is running low. Okay, so the Buddha says it's impossible, it cannot happen that a agreeable result, some desirable result, some kind of happiness can arise from bodily misconduct, verbal misconduct, mental misconduct. In other words, bodily, verbal, mental misconduct, that is what we call bad karma, unwholesome action, whether body, speech, or thought. And so those types of misconduct, they create karma, and when that karma ripens, it's going to bring some type of unpleasant experience, something undesirable, unhappiness, suffering, pain, and so on. So that's paragraph 16. 17, it's impossible that an undesirable, disagreeable result could be produced from good conduct of body, speech, or mind. So in other words, when one acts in a wholesome way by body, speech, or mind, one creates good karma or wholesome karma, and when that karma gets the opportunity to ripen, it will bring results that are agreeable, desirable, good fortune, good inner qualities, happiness, well-being. So those are, you call these paragraphs 16 and 17 are dealing with the direct results of karma in terms of its ripening. Paragraphs 18 and 19 are dealing with the rebirth potentials of karma. So he says it's impossible, it cannot happen that a person engaging in bodily, verbal, or mental misconduct, now this is the important phrase, could on that account, for that reason, on the dissolution of the body after death, be reborn in a happy destination, even in the heavenly world. So you see, it's what he's saying is that the misconduct of body, speech, or mind, when it produces its rebirth result, it will produce a rebirth result in the lower realms, one of the lower realms. But it's still possible that a person who engages in misconduct of body, speech, or mind could be reborn in a good destination, in a happy realm, but not because of that misconduct. Because we've all done, a lot of good and bad deeds, and maybe we've done a number of bad deeds, but some very powerful, wholesome, good deeds. And so it could be the case that these powerful good deeds take on the role of producing rebirth. And so you can't look at say, when Bhikkhu Bodhi was a 12-year-old kid, he used to pick on little kids in the schoolyard, which was bad conduct. So how did he get reborn in the heavenly world? But I wasn't reborn in the heavenly world because I picked on little kids in the schoolyard when I was 12 years old. But no, I'm reborn in the heavenly world, and then one of the bigger deities beats me up. Then you ask, why is Deva Bodhi getting picked on by the big deities up there? Then somebody with a supervision looks into that and says, when he was 12 years old, he used to pick on this little kid in the schoolyard. So that's the result. And so the bad conduct of body, speech, or mind, when it takes on the role of generating rebirth, it brings rebirth in the lower realms, the bad destinations. Okay, then the converse of that in paragraph 19, it cannot happen that a person engaging in good bodily conduct, good verbal conduct, good mental conduct, could, on that account, for that reason, after death, be reborn in one of the bad realms of rebirth. There is no such possibility. But it is possible that a person engaging in good bodily, verbal, mental conduct could, on that account, after death, be reborn in a happy destination in the heavenly worlds. Okay, so this doesn't mean that a person who is doing good deeds of body, speech, and mind can't be reborn in one of the lower realms. But if he's reborn in one of the lower realms, this is because of some unwholesome karma that person has done. So it could be that maybe a person has committed murder, then he has a change of heart, and he does a lot of good deeds, maybe becomes a philanthropist or something like that. And so this person maybe then gets reborn in a lower world, maybe even in hell. Now, the reason why that person is reborn in hell, it's not because of the good deeds that they've done, but because of the unwholesome karma. So that unwholesome karma could, if it's really powerful, it could lead to the rebirth in hell. But the good karma is still there, and maybe it will bring some relief from the suffering in the lower rebirth. Like, to take an example, very concrete example, it's said that to be reborn as an animal, it's the result of an unwholesome karma. But there's a big difference between if one is an animal out in the forest, always in danger of being captured by a bigger animal and eaten. So those animals, they live in conflict, always difficult to get food. And then one is reborn as a cat or a dog, which is adopted by a loving family, and you get a nice bed, no fear. Do they get 3 meals a day or 2? And then that good karma also, it can, after the bad karma wears off, it can come to maturity and then produce good results or a good rebirth elsewhere. So it's very, very complicated, the workings of karma. But the principles are, we could clearly determine the principles that unwholesome behavior of body, speech, or mind leads to undesirable results. Good or virtuous behavior of body, speech, or mind leads to desirable results. Okay, I'll just give like 5 minutes to questions now, then we'll come back after the lunch period, and then we could have further discussion. Adina.
I'm still troubled by why the Buddha even bothered to say that women could not. I mean, even though it was the times.
And also,
why did he even take the trouble to say that?
Even, one could also raise the question. I mean, I'm not saying that I necessarily agree with this. I haven't looked into it, but one could say that this could have been an interpolation into the text, coming from a period when there could have been like some resentment amongst the monks that the women are admitted into the monastic order, or maybe just to bolster the sense of superiority of men. I mean, that's always the possibility. Let us take in the back. Take the floating microphone.
I'm pretty loud.
Yeah, but it's for the recorder. Okay.
I think that our attachment to culture may be not appreciated until something like that is said. But I wouldn't put too much stake in it, because we're not talking about a physical contest where at that point in time, maybe in history, that was very much the driving force for that belief. We're talking about the enlightenment of the mind, where it's pretty obvious that man has no particular advantage over woman in any sense.
As far, again, looking at it again from the historical point of view, which I brought up, as far as the capacity for enlightenment goes, there's no text that says that a male has a superior capacity for enlightenment. A male has how to put this grammatically? A male has a superior capacity for enlightenment over a female. In fact, there's a sutta, a little sutta, it comes in the Bhikkhuni Samyutta. These are the collected sayings with the nuns. There's a nun, she's meditating in seclusion. Then Mara comes to her and says, how could you make any pretext to be enlightened? You're a woman, not a man. And then the nun replies to Mara. She says, I know you, Mara. And then she says, she uses a verse, something like, when the mind is well concentrated and insight is flowing smoothly, then there's no obstruction to enlightenment. One who thinks, I am a man, I am a woman, that is the work of delusion.